Hi, and welcome to the NBA show. My name is Morten Jensen, and today we'll be discussing LaMarcus Aldridge, who has agreed with the San Antonio Spurs to not play there anymore and is right now looking for a trade away from the club. So stay tuned. LaMarcus Aldridge has spent the better part of 5.5 years with the San Antonio Spurs franchise. He signed there as a free agent to much fanfare because the Spurs had usually had trouble signing free agents, and he was one of the best guys on the market, if not the best player on the market that particular year. The Spurs got him, and that was a huge get. After the first couple of seasons, though, Aldridge was dissatisfied. He wasn't getting the same touches, he wasn't getting the same offensive responsibility, but instead of asking out, he actually spoke to management, Greg Popovich, and everyone, and they sat down to figure out a role for him. Like, he was averaging somewhere in the area of 17 and a half points per game over those first 2 years, but his third year with the Spurs, he actually took a significant step up, averaged over 23 points per game, in large part because he started communicating with the front office and Greg Popovich. They all sat down and figured out how can we best move forward. So while Aldridge has been rumored away from the Spurs for a pretty long period of time, I actually think it's worth mentioning that he ended up having a really good career with the Spurs as a Spur. Despite initial problems or concerns, they actually took the time to settle down, figure out what's wrong, and then went from there. And that's positive. I think that is something that we need to take into account when we look back at Aldridge's tenure as a San Antonio Spur. Like, yes, it didn't move perfectly. He didn't win a championship. It is what it is. But he was a positive influence to the team. He learned something. He grew as a player. The Spurs got tremendous production out of him. You know, it now was just time. He wanted something else. He's on an expiring contract worth $24 million. His play, regrettably, has declined, especially in terms of production. Now, he's still valuable in the right circumstances, but for someone earning $24 million a year, obviously his current production of 13.5 points and like 4.5 rebounds is not up to par. That's understandable. But for now, the Spurs and Aldridge are just looking to cut ties, and in a friendly manner. It doesn't seem like there's any ill will towards either side. It just seems like they've decided it's time to move on. So what can the Spurs get for Aldridge on the trade market? So let's start off with this. They're probably not going to get a significant return, and that's understandable for the reasons I just outlined. Aldridge is going to be 36. He's not that productive anymore. He's probably not a full-time starter at this point in the NBA. And when I say that, it's not against him. It's more along the lines that he's not a great defensive player. He's clearly lost a step athletically as well. He's more of an offensive-minded big. You can have those off the bench. I don't think that's a guy you would fit into a starting lineup for a competitive team at the very least. And then you can look at it and go, okay, he could start on many bad teams, sure, but why would you want to do Aldridge the disservice of sending him to a team that's in the bottom of the league? I don't think the Spurs are looking to do that, honestly. That being said, it's equally difficult to trade him to a contender, because most contenders right now simply do not have the necessary contracts to send out and get Aldridge in return. There's a reason great teams are great. It's primarily financial control. They have value contracts. Aldridge right now is not a value contract, meaning that if a team like the Lakers or the Clippers want to get Aldridge into the roster, they would need to ship out contracts that are high in monetary value, and they would lose in terms of talent because they would downgrade. So that's pretty much off the table as well. That means we have to look at second-tier teams. For example, the Dallas Mavericks. The Mavs could offer James Johnson and Dwight Powell in return. That would at least match salaries, and they would get Aldridge back. That's a slight upgrade, but ultimately speaking, it's not a big return for the Spurs. They get an additional, not an additional, they actually get an expiring contract in Johnson, and then they get a long-term contract in Dwight Powell. And we'll get back to the long-term contract as well in just a minute, but that could be a way to actually finagle a trade by looking at multiple contracts instead of just one contract and say, let's add in a couple of guys to match the salary output of LaMarcus Aldridge, because that way we can actually build a trade where we align value to a better extent. But rest assured, no one is going to take on Aldridge and his $24 million at the age of almost 36 while giving out like a first-round draft pick or a young guy. I just don't see that as feasible. And if it happens, good on you, San Antonio, then you got a haul. I don't know which team would be interested in doing that. So let's get to it. There is a way that the Spurs could actually upgrade in this particular scenario by trading away LaMarcus Aldridge. And that is by taking on long-term money. Now, I know what you're saying. Why would the Spurs take on long-term money and clog up their own salary cap? Does that even make sense? It depends, because here's the thing. While there are a lot of overpaid contracts on the market, a lot of them are actually fairly decent players. So you could make a talent upgrade by going for someone who is overpaid, who is better than Aldridge, maybe even younger than Aldridge. But you understand by taking on that contract, you're taking on someone who is overpaid and you're taking on long-term money. The Spurs, however, is a weird team when it comes to traditional roster construction. They don't tank, which is very admirable, by the way. Very important for me to note that. So they might actually be inclined to say, you know what, we get better. So we'll take on that bad contract because we like the player that contract is attached to. That way we can stay competitive this year, next year as well. And there is actually logic in doing this for another reason. The 2021 free agent class is very, very empty in terms of top tier talent. The Spurs quite simply don't need to have oodles of cap space. So they might as well find a team out there who is desperate to get off of certain long-term contracts and say, we'll take that. We will give you LaMarcus Aldridge and we'll take on your long-term contract plus additional compensation, maybe for a second-round pick or something else. And then we can stay competitive for the next year, this year and next, because we don't anticipate playing the free agency market in 2021 anyway. So it doesn't even matter to us that we take on a contract that runs through 2021, 2022. It has no effect. We just get the better player. We get maybe a second-round draft pick. That's a good return, right? Because why not? There's no reason not to explore that avenue. Or, as the example I alluded to before with the Mavericks, you could mix and match a little bit. It doesn't have to be one bad contract. You could take on part of a contract that's bad and one that's expiring. Like Dwight Powell has a couple years remaining on his deal, James Johnson expiring. You can find those type of deals on the NBA market pretty easily. So there's a reason they could go and explore and find out how to best optimize LaMarcus Aldridge as a trade asset that way. They can get some financial flexibility in return by taking on an expiring contract, but also taking on someone who is maybe runs 2 or 3 years down the line. As long as it doesn't sacrifice their entire future and they take on someone who has 4 years left, which they practically can't anyway, because most contracts are 4 years or shorter and we're already halfway through this year, but you catch my drift. Ultimately, it comes down to two things. You need to balance your own needs and you need to balance the needs of Aldridge. And yes, that last part is actually important. I know a lot of fans and pundits would say, just get whatever you can and don't even take the players' feelings into consideration. That's not how you conduct business in today's NBA. Being pro-player and actually listening to a player's wishes and demands and whatnot is immensely important. If the Spurs listen to where Aldridge wants to go, and they at least attempt to trade him to that specific destination. One thing is if it works or not, like that's out of their control, but if they make a valiant effort in getting him to the place where he wants to go, that is something that's going to look positive on them. Agents will be more inclined to name San Antonio as a future free agent destination. Agents would be more inclined to speak well of San Antonio and really have positive associations with them when they speak to their network. This is a huge part of how the NBA works that really goes undercovered in the media a lot. Being able to listen to what your players want, huge, absolutely huge. And the Spurs are doing just that with Aldridge. Again, it's not safe to assume that they're going to fulfill all his wishes. Like if Aldridge wants to go to the Lakers, but the Lakers just do not have any interest in taking him on, then the Spurs can't do anything. They can make the effort of calling them and listening to what they have to offer, if anything, and then they can go back to Aldridge and his agent and let them know we really tried. That's good. That's good enough. That's really a good attempt, and it's something that will be remembered and appreciated by both the player and the agent. So the Spurs are doing right by Aldridge, and I think Aldridge is also doing right by the Spurs by being honest and very, very transparent in his wants and desires and his needs and communicating this with the Spurs. Now, right now, he's not going to play because why risk injury, and for him to get injured, no one would want to take him on. That just makes sense. So we're looking at a scenario right now where they are just going to plan ahead. They are going to mutually agree to certain things. They're going to sit down together and figure out a proper destination. They're going to be talking every single day to figure out how to best solve this issue. And you know what? That's pretty positive. Instead of having this very negative animosity towards each other because both parties want to leave the partnership, working together to find the best suitable solution is just a great way of creating and developing and maintaining relationships. If the Spurs do right by Aldridge, which it really seems like they're going to do, Aldridge would also share that word moving forward. Who knows? He might even come back as like a announcer or something down the line because he likes the organization because they did right by him. Who knows? All I'm saying is this can't hurt anyone in the long run. Being able to work with one another, being able to communicate, being able to actually go the distance to figure out an issue, that's Spurs basketball, man. It really is. And I am still in awe of how they conduct themselves on a professional level. I know I shouldn't be biased, but in this case I am. I think what they're doing, how they're building a culture, how they're solving issues, how they're working with players, it's admirable. It really is, and more teams should be doing just that. For now though, it's about finding a new home for Aldridge. Personally, I kind of like the Dallas idea. I mean, it's one thing to assume that he won't be there long term next to Luka because Luka is, I think, 22 and Aldridge is going to be 36. But you can re-sign Aldridge in the offseason for what I have to assume is close to the minimum. And then you'll have a veteran big playing alongside Kristaps Porzingis and who can sort of educate him a little bit and give him some pointers moving forward. That wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. Or maybe there is a chance that you are just flipping expiring contracts with Andre Drummond, maybe, where Aldridge goes to the Cavs as a veteran influence for this year, and then after that he signs on once again as a mentor. There are definitely landing spots out there that could make some sense. Now, one thing is that Aldridge probably wouldn't want to go to Cleveland. As I mentioned earlier, he probably would prefer a contender. I'm just basically spitballing on ideas. There could be some ground being made up here where Aldridge says, I want to go here for this particular reason, I want to go there for another reason. Again, it boils down to communication. Dallas, I think, could be realistic. I kind of like the fit, but you also have to just look at fringe playoff teams. Maybe there is a way or a path where Aldridge just improves that team enough where they could sneak into like a play-in tournament setting. Maybe. So we have to look at those teams in the margins. We have to look at like the secondary non-contender teams as well, because that's where the odds are highest for him to find a new home. All that being said, I really find it enjoyable to watch how the Spurs and Aldridge are dealing with this, and I look forward to seeing where his new home is going to be before the March 25th NBA trade deadline.